I just watched Furiosa, and this might be one of the most disappointing movies of the year. Let's talk about it.
Furiosa! We've come too far.
Furiosa is the fifth movie in the Mad Max franchise and arrives almost a decade after the release of Fury Road, which amazed critics and fans alike, grossed over $380 million worldwide, and earned a Best Picture nomination. We now get Furiosa starring Lila Brown and Anya Taylor-Joy playing different stages of the titular character's journey, and Chris Hemsworth as the villainous Dr. Dementus doing evil things and smirking a lot as he's doing them. Going into Furiosa, I heard a lot of critics describing it as a revenge movie, and I would disagree with that. There is a revenge element to it, but I don't think that element drives the plot enough, no pun intended, to make this a revenge movie. Not in the way, at least, that John Wick is a revenge movie, where the meat of the story begins and ends with John Wick trying to kill the guys who killed his dog. The way Furiosa does resemble John Wick is obviously in its action. No, there's not many hand-to-hand combat sequences. Instead, it focuses on the more sweeping and in some ways epic car chases that we've come to expect from this franchise. In particular, there's an oil rig heist scene that occurs about halfway through the movie that was one of the most jaw-dropping things I've seen in a theater this year. The scene itself is a masterclass not only in choreography, but in the way that the camera moves throughout it. Cinematographer Simon Duggan puts the camera basically wherever it needs to go, to the point where a character is crawling underneath the oil rig, and you are able to see everything that she's seeing and everything that she's doing. At the same time, you get aerial shots of the invasion, a dynamic camera that moves in and out of the car, and some wide shots just to prove that the actors, or more accurately the stuntmen, are all doing this at the same time. It's the type of scene in which the awe of the surrounding audience is almost palpable, even though I was in a theater of only 2 other people. This scene is certainly the high point of Furiosa, though there's a few other action scenes that carry a similar level of spectacle. As I noted earlier, it's the wide camera angles that allow you to feel the scope of the action that set them apart from other modern-day action movies. Having said all of this, it's a shame that the surrounding story is constructed in such a way that make the action scenes feel like individual triumphs as opposed to integral parts of a larger story. The best way I can describe how I felt watching Furiosa is comparing it to the previously on montages that run before the start of a new episode on Netflix or something. It's a story that makes sense where each snippet is the logical result of the one that came before it, but it's obvious that there's more happening in between those snippets. The story in Furiosa is cohesive, but it also feels somewhat bare, as if the scenes that would really help us to get to know Furiosa were left on the cutting room floor. Now, I understand that every movie does have a larger story outside of what the audience sees. Characters do things off screen, events happen, and are only mentioned by characters in passing, but most movies also include the smaller in-between moments that can be used to flesh out a character or hint at some deeper character dynamics. The script for Furiosa could care less about developing the character that the movie is named after. In fact, there's almost nothing and no one in the script that the audience can actually relate to, understand, or sympathize with. It's a bunch of beings doing things that are semi-interesting, and when there's action it's exciting, but you just don't necessarily care about the implications this action has on the characters. It also does the thing where it splits the movie into chapters, so 4 or 5 times throughout the movie the screen fades to black and you get text that says, Chapter 2, The Stowaway, or whatever, and it signals that you're getting into the next phase of the movie. But from what can sometimes come off as a clever storytelling convention, ultimately comes off as a lazy way to mask the disjointedness of this script. All of this is to say that the movie lacked a certain emotional pull that I needed in order to be fully invested. The most interesting aspect of the story is the politics that are bound to occur when you're in a post-apocalyptic world. There's a few interesting scenes of negotiations between leaders, but even these scenes undercut the tension by having Chris Hemsworth just blurt out a deal, and then having the opposing party accept it. It's as if the writers needed them to make this deal, so they just wrote it in the script that way. Speaking of Chris Hemsworth, even him I was a little disappointed in. I would say this is his second best performance as a cult leader after his work in Bad Times at the El Royale. This type of villain he's playing is just so familiar at this point that it's nearly impossible for him to do something fresh or new with it. I'm looking forward to seeing how people feel about the ending of this movie. I found it a tad underwhelming and also kind of awkward in execution. It was as if the actors didn't really know the tone of the scene that they were supposed to be acting in. It seemed kind of drawn out and redundant. I think they were trying to subvert expectations, but for a movie that doesn't take many risks, it's odd that the ending is where they try to be unconventional. So yeah, you can say I was disappointed with this one. The shallow characters that Fury Road got away with doesn't work for this one. The action sequences are still top-notch, but I'm more likely to revisit them in segmented pieces instead of rewatching this movie as a whole. I'm gonna give Furiosa 2.5 stars out of 5. Thanks for watching my review of Furiosa. Please consider liking and subscribing, and I hope to see you next time.